Welcome to Tim's Take, and we will continue our discussion with Dr. Eric Bailey, our state beef nutrition specialist, extension specialist. And we discussed before about we had a late season drought. We did not get the stockpile pasture like we thought we would. One of the things you talked about, well, hay's pretty inexpensive right now. You may want to buy some more, but really the efficiency of our feeding goes a long ways on that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, if you imagine a scenario where you're putting round bales out in the pasture and you're putting a week's worth of hay out at a time and there's no ring feeder around them, cows will waste 40% of that hay, right? So if you paid, let's say, $50 a bale right now and you waste 40% of it, you're paying almost $100 a bale, right? Mm-hmm. So for the feed that they actually get, that they actually consume. So yeah, I mean, now that 40%, that's a pretty extreme example, mm-hmm. but there's two lessons in there that I think are highly relevant. The more hay that we put out for these animals, and when I say more in terms of like a week's worth of hay, the more waste they're going to have, because they're going to be picky, because they have, unrestricted access to as much feed as they want. So they're going to pull hay out of the feeder. They're going to foul that hay. They use it as bedding, or they, deposit manure or urine on it, right? And so then they're not going to eat that. So that's where a lot of that waste comes from. I've always been a strong proponent of, if it's feasible for your operation, the best thing you can do to minimize waste is to feed 1 day's worth of hay at a time. And the way that you can accomplish that is by, in particular when the ground is hard and dry and not, it's not snowing mm-hmm. or anything like that, to unroll that hay, give enough space for all these cows to get out there. A beef cow, one bale of hay will last a cow for 30 days. Well, one bale of hay will last 30 cows for 1 day as mm-hmm. well. So you can do some kind of cowboy math and make some estimates along those lines. But I've always been a big proponent of, if I was going to invest in equipment to facilitate hay feeding operation, I would try to unroll hay rather than spend a lot of money on feeders. But knowing that my mental model is to go into this where I'm going to trade labor mm-hmm. for waste, right? So I'm going to reduce labor or reduce waste by increasing the amount of labor effort that I put into putting out hay.
Now, is that 30 cow days per bale? Does that include the waste, or is that just with?
So that does include waste. So if you look at estimates of dry matter intake mm-hmm. for a beef cow, even at 2.5% of body weight for 30 days, it's roughly 780 pounds. On a 900-pound bale, right, you've got about 120 pounds of waste factored in there. So it's probably 15% waste factored in there.
So that's taking care of it.
That's
using rings or rolling it out.
Yep, exactly.
So if you roll it out, they'll be a lot more efficient. They'll eat it versus using it for bedding.
Absolutely. And if you notice them using it for bedding, that means that you probably put out more than they could consume, mm-hmm. that you've got an opportunity to cut back a little bit, right? So,
a lot of times in the summer when we're strip grazing, they'll eat all they want the first 30 minutes to an hour, and the rest of the day just kind of lounge around. Yeah. Same. Is that okay in the winter too?
So generally we think that cattle will have a large meal early in the morning, a large meal around dusk, and then they'll kind of mill around and pick at things mm-hmm. over the course of the day. It's been my experience that when we put out unroll hay like that, we kind of turn them into meal feeders. They eat a lot, but it depends on whether we're providing some supplement too and a little bit of hay. One of the things that I told people during the drought of 2018, soy hulls are really cheap, and I think soy hulls are a great hay replacement. If hay gets expensive, soy hulls make a lot of sense. They're highly digestible fiber, moderate protein. They make a really nice complement to feeding hay. What we did was 10 pounds of hay and 10 pounds of soy hulls to mature beef cows, lactating. Mm-hmm. These had been spring calving cows in July, and we got along great with that. And what I observed at that time was that they would come in and clean those soy hulls up, and they might pick at the hay, but the hay stuck around for most of the day, and it was in the evening when they were really cleaning up the last of the hay. So So when we do practices like this, we definitely, I think we maybe accentuate that they become meal feeders and have two big meals a day.
Okay.
So
you talk about the labor, and we've also in the past talked about strip grazing.
Yep.
And one of the things is it doesn't involve a lot of labor.
Yeah.
30 minutes a day to move your fence, your electric fence. So you could do the same thing in the wintertime if you're grazing something that you've stockpiled.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, even this brings in ideas or concepts like bale grazing, where you set the bales out in the field and then you move a polywire to give them access to bales. It's a very common practice in the northern United States and into Canada. I see more and more extension content about it. I don't know that we do it a whole lot here in Missouri. Got some colleagues over in Kentucky that are doing that a fair bit. Part of the bale grazing approach, though, is to actually allow for a fair bit of waste because they're trying to add nutrients to poor soils or trying to renovate a field, right? Because when they foul that material, that hay, and they have that waste, they're depositing manure, they're depositing carbon, right, in both their manure and the hay that they get wasted. And I've seen some pretty neat pictures where grass growth in these bale grazed areas the next year, particularly where the hay is wasted, the grass looks stronger the next year.
Oh, yeah.
Because you also increase your water holding capacity as well, right, in that area by adding cover to bare ground. Because one of the principles of soil health is to always have a living root in the soil, always keep the ground covered, right, to mitigate extreme fluctuations in temperature, whether that's hot or cold. So,
and when we overgraze, we're going against that soil health principle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Overgrazed pastures are probably some of the worst violations that we see for erosion, for lots of things.
Agreed.
So let's say I've made hay. I've got some really good hay that I cut on time, and then I've got the stuff later on or something I bought from someone. What would I feed first? Would I start with my lower quality first and then high quality in the middle of the winter? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we can take this a couple different ways. I want to attack it from animals. So my approach is always to feed your best hay to your growing animals. So if you've
not lactating.
Not lactating. So if you've got calves that you're backgrounding, or you've got first calf heifers or bred heifers, the animals who are still growing, they need the best groceries first. And that's because in general, you have to meet their maintenance energy requirements and demand for additional nutrients for growth. Whereas like a 5-year-old cow, she's mature, she's just meeting maintenance energy requirements. So even if she is lactating, I would prioritize higher quality forage for the growing animals first, even over a lactating female, particularly young females that you want to last in your herd for a long time. If you can have the opportunity to feed bred heifers, first calf heifers separately,
because she's still growing.
Because she's still growing. First calf heifer's gonna calve at somewhere in the neighborhood of 85 to 90% of her mature body weight. So she's still growing while she's raising that first calf. Another way to think about it too, let's say you've just got mature cows, I would prioritize nutrients for lactation and for breeding, right? So if I've got fall calving cows, I just had a fall calving herd, I'd probably be feeding my good hay in November and December because breeding season's probably going to be in December, right?
So you want that extra weight on her?
Yeah, I want her looking good. I want her in a good plate of nutrition. I want her cycling going into the breeding season so that she breeds early and she weans a heavier calf next year. Because I think one of the great things that we don't consider in the beef industry is that the number one way that I can increase weaning weight on calves, make them older. Right? So if I have a 100 cow herd and they calve for 90 days and you assume that there's an equal probability of a calf being born on the first day and on the last day, meaning that the average calf in the herd is born on day 45 of the breeding or the calving season, every calf that's born on day 45 compared to day 1 is probably going to weigh 100 pounds less. Right? So I could increase weaning weight of the herd if I could front load my calving season distribution to have more of those calves born early in the year. And so prioritizing nutrition this time of year to make cows go into the breeding season in good body condition. That way they're cycling early. That way they conceive early. That way they calve early. That's going to do more good than creep feeding will, than picking a top 1% DPD weaning weight calf or sire, right? I mean, it's. I don't want to say it's a lost art, but it's common sense that I don't think we often think about just how important having defined breeding and calving seasons and doing what we can to try and get as many of those calves to be born as early as we can.
Because you're going to probably sell them all at the same time.
You're going to sell them all at the same time. They're
and
more
you're going
uniform crop, right? Yeah, and if you compare a calf on day 1 versus a calf on day 90, 200 pounds of weight difference right there.
Right.
So, and in this market where a pound of weight's worth, now I'm going to use a value of gain, so I'm going to say $3 a pound, right? So they're selling for $4 plus a pound, but you got to factor in that price slide as they get heavier, right? So even when you factor in value of gain, you're probably at $3 a pound on 200 pounds. There might be a $600 difference per head between the calf born on the first day and the calf born on the last day. So,
and they can have just as good genetics.
Yep, absolutely.
But if the mom missed a cycle or where that delays
exactly
conception.
So yeah, I would prioritize good hay for lactating cows now to set up for the breeding season, even though I know that later on I'm probably going to have issues with cold stress, right? So we get, snowstorm or ice storm or even a rain event when it's 35, 40 degrees outside. I mean, we know that their maintenance energy requirements are going to increase because of the cold stress. I still think I'd rather set up a good breeding season now, and then how I would handle the cold stress later on is I would just increase the amount of hay that I feed them, because cattle will increase their feed intake when weather events like that occur. So,
well, I noticed last night I was eating more than I normally did because I'm getting cold outside.
Yeah,
we're the same way.
Absolutely.
We try to stay warm. The idea of giving your stockers or those that you're backgrounding some of your better quality really flies in the face of some folks' thoughts, because you think, well, they're just out there. They're not reproducing. They're not. So I'm not going to worry about them.
Well, and we should define your objectives too, right? Because if you're backgrounding your calf crop for 90 days before you sell them, you've got a limited amount of time to put additional weight on them to justify the risk of carrying these calves longer. And so for me, in that system, if I can't get them to gain 2 pounds a day, I don't want to keep them. I'd rather just sell them and take that risk off of my hands, right? Because if a 2,200 pound or $2,200 calf dies right now, that's a pretty big cost to spread over the ones that lived, right? And so if we're going to background, we got to push them. If my goal is to sell them not in 60 or 90 days, but instead to maybe graze them next spring and sell a long yearling, an 8 weight in the summer, then yeah, I've got more time. And those animals that if I'm going to be in an extended grazing system, if they gain half a pound a day on poorer quality tall fescue, that's probably not the end of the world, because they're going to compensate. You've got time on your side for them to do compensatory gain. It's the backgrounders. Oh, I weaned my calves 30 days ago and I'm going to sell them in another 30 days. You don't have time to feed them lower quality forages, and expect that you're going to put an additional 100 pounds on them to justify the backgrounding, right? Because, we talk a big game about preconditioning and backgrounding systems and VAC 45 and all of these, where we're trying to generate a premium for our animals at auction. But the largest driver of additional revenue from a backgrounding or a preconditioning program is additional weight on the calf. It's not the undefined premium that you will receive at auction for 2 rounds of shots and castrated and so on.
That kind of slides right into what we did as a kid growing up. We would buy heifers and steers in the fall, put them on our corn stalks and do that, and we could supplement some hay with them, but we were probably not maximizing their growth, I don't think.
Yeah, I would say not. And I guess when did you all sell them in that
Well,
system?
sometimes we would sell them in February or March when we took them off. Sometimes we'd keep them into their summer when we had good pastures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in that system there, if you kept them through the summer, I don't think it really hurt you all that bad. But you did bring up, I'm gonna change course just a little bit, but this is highly relevant to this discussion. So I'm terrified of interest rates right now, Tim. Terrified. So a lot of operating notes for farmers in this state, 8.5%. If you're going and buying a $2,200 weaned calf right now, and that you're going to background, that you're going to try to make a little money on, do you know what you're spending a day per head per day in interest? 46 cents. So you keep that rascal for 100 days, and that's $46. You keep them for 200 days, that's $92. What I'm seeing right now, I've never seen this before. So we've always said that in backgrounding operations that feed is 2/3 of the cost of that animal, cost per pound of weight gain. I'm seeing closeouts in this state right now, this fall, backgrounders, where feed costs are below 40%. And I've never seen that before because, and you look back at Beef Magazine and Popular Press, it's always 60, 65%. That's what the cost of gain. That's what feed is. But this interest thing has come out of nowhere in the last 2 years, 3 years. I would say even just 2 years. And, you know, because operating notes were 4.5%, and then they're 5.5%, and then 6.5%, and then they jump to 8.5%. And, you know, the more you give for those animals and the more that you borrow to give for those animals, the greater that interest cost per head per day is. That's more than people were paying for yardage not that long ago. It's crazy.
If that gets into spring, you've really paid a lot.
Well, and that's you're driving my point home for me there, is that I'm concerned about the future of these business models, these enterprises where we buy calves in the fall because they're cheap, right? We know that there's a lot of supply on the market. Demand is static, and so price generally goes down.
That's probably why we did it, because it was cheap.
Yeah, you buy them, you hold them over, and then you sell them later. I don't know that you can afford to pursue a strategy of compensatory gain in the modern marketplace just because of the way that interest rate is affecting. I mean, interest is it's probably the second largest cost on a partial budget for a backgrounder right now.
Well, we had so many years of low interest, we kind of got out of that habit of thinking about that. You know, money's almost free, 2%. You know. Well,
and I'm the millennial here complaining about 8.5% interest rate when it's half of what it was in 1980, right?
Right.
So we've seen worse. Yeah. But we're also making larger investments in these animals than we ever have, and so that's where my concern comes from. If we make $200 a head on a animal that we have $2,500 in, what's our return on investment? It's less than 10%, right? So, I think there becomes an inflection point where people wake up and realize, hey, I'm borrowing money at 8.5% to make 6% profit. Could I just make 5% profit in a CD and not have near the same amount of work that I have otherwise?
And maybe that's why our herd numbers are so low now.
Absolutely. Could I make more money by leasing my pasture out for $100 an acre a year and not borrow any money, not have any time or labor invested in it? I mean, we got to start asking some tough questions, and you're absolutely right. They definitely are going to influence herd expansion, number of farms going out of business, right? New entrants into the industry, right? Because this is Eric's opinion. I mean, I think cattle prices are high right now, but I think they're just high enough to convince people to sell out and break even and walk away from it. They're not so high that I'm sitting over here running numbers and trying to figure out who I'm going to borrow money from to go and try and make an operation, make a go of it myself. Right. So,
well, one thing that you mentioned last time that we talked is Missouri has a lot of small producers, and the cow-calf often, and you were making the argument that really you'd be more efficient by doing stockers and selling about June.
Yep.
Take advantage of that big pastures that we have in the spring.
Yep.
We have lush growth.
Yep.
Take advantage of that and fit your model to what you have.
I still firmly believe that, because if you have 3 acres per cow and you wean a 600-pound steer calf in the fall, how many pounds of beef did you produce per acre that year?
200.
200, right?
Yeah.
So what we've shown in Mount Vernon for 6 years now, 2 500-pound heifers per acre for 90 days from the 1st of April to roughly the last week of June, 1st of July, we can generate 350 pounds of beef gain per acre with no supplements, no feed. That's just grass. And so you think about that, we're nearly doubling the productivity per acre with a stocker operation relative to a cow-calf operation. That has been my argument for a long time, is that if I'm doing the math to try and make a cattle operation pencil and I'm only invested in one enterprise, that cow-calf enterprise, I can't give very much for land and still be profitable. Or I have to donate my labor, right, to facilitate it.
And a lot of folks do that, don't they?
And a lot of people do that because they're trying to build equity in a cow herd that they think that's a retirement account. It's a nest egg for them. And I respect the people that are going that route, but you're definitely not going to feed a family on equity on a retirement account, right? So then you're going to have a job in town. So then your operation's never going to scale. And that might be fine if you want to pursue, it as much of a hobby as it is anything. But I think there's a lot of young people out there who would like to do it full time. But we've never really tried to teach them alternative business models and make them think about return on investment, pounds of beef gain per acre, really have a sharp pencil, diversifying your enterprises. I mean, having stockers and cows, maybe direct marketing some beef off of your farm, right? Not investing in equipment, but instead of, strip grazing Milo in the winter, right? There's a lot of these different ideas that are out there, that there is some combination of these alternative ideas out there that will facilitate young people coming back into the business. And it's going to be different for every producer, for every operation in every county. But even the small operations, I think would be wise to consider. And I've had a few calls this fall. Hey, I've got 50 cows. It looks like they're worth a lot right now. Should I sell them and do something different? If not, what do I do, right? And so then I talk to them about the stocker deal and, have some nice productive conversations.
Right, because even that nest egg, you got to replace her every several years.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because, if you look at our Missouri cow-calf extension budget, right, so we're at $400 a cow a year in replacement. So that's assuming that we replace 15% of the cows in the herd every year. So,
and quality of life. One thing my dad always said: if you have livestock, it keeps you home.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you are just going the stocker route, you've got 7-8 months to do what you want to do.
Absolutely. Or, you could come back with another set if you get some precip in the fall, right? Or you could maybe, if you've got crop ground, plant some cover crops, run another set in the fall. Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility. And that's actually been probably the number one reason that I've gotten calls about running stockers in the state, of producers who are tired of feeding hay in the winter. Hey, I'd like to move. I'm an older producer. I'd like to move to a more seasonal business. Let's do something different.
Or if you're a grain farmer also, and you have all this, you still have fences, or you go electric. If you have all this corn residue, that you could put cover crops possibly, but you could also just graze it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I think will be interesting to see here in years come. If grain prices stay chronically low, how much of this marginal farm ground that we tore all the fences out around are we going to be looking to replant back into perennial forages, into pasture, right? Because I've seen a lot of farms in this state that don't need to be farmed.
Right.
Where the cattle were sold, the pasture was hit with 2,4-D, no-till soybeans into that sod, tear the fences out, and then now, it's farm ground now.
Right.
And it wasn't good pasture ground before that, so.
And what benefit you did get from that pasture the first few years is gone now.
Absolutely.
That it had some decent soil health to it and some carbon built up that you've lost.
Yep.
You mentioned the price of equipment and the price of beef. I recently saw a figure that showed the price of beef since 1980s up 300 something percent. But inflation is about that much too. If you start figuring up where equipment costs are over 1,000%, and that gives another reason that we might need to rethink our model.
And that's why I've argued against leaning heavily into harvesting hay and feeding it back to beef cattle. That has always been central to my argument against the hay production model. Has simply been that the depreciation that you occur from buying equipment is significant. The amount of capital that you've got to have access to have the equipment to start making hay. If you put fence and water around a hay field, that adds value to the land. If you buy a 85 horse tractor and a swather and a baler, they're worth about 50% as much in 5 years as when you bought them, right? And so I firmly believe, and I'll say this in public, I've said it and I'll say it again, depreciation is the biggest challenge that we have to overcome in our agricultural business models.
And the interest that you had to pay on that equipment.
Well, and then now as well too, right?
Yeah. So
if you've had to borrow money to buy all that equipment.
This will segue into our next discussion this spring about trying to plant some crops that we could graze next winter.
Absolutely. And I've got lots of thoughts about that. I've been thinking about it with grain prices where they are right now. I think there's going to be some real opportunities, but we'll have to figure out the fencing, right? And so maybe that's where we talk about some of these virtual fencing options.
But let them do your harvest for you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. And this is it for Tim's Take. We had a great discussion, and we'll continue discussion this spring with some more options that you might have. We'll see you next time.